Today I want to cover using QNAP's Hybrid Sync 3 backup program and how it can contribute to protecting you against data loss, viruses, and ransomware, as well as briefly discuss when you should use backup versus sync. If you have a QNAP NAS and you want to learn more about protecting your data, then watch the rest of this video. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe and click that notifications icon so you'll be notified of new content. One of the key benefits of using a NAS unit is to centralize as well as protect your data, such as your photos, documents, or other critical data. The benefit and convenience can also be a problem if you don't take some measures to protect yourself in the event that you get hit with either a hardware failure or worse, a virus or ransomware. To start with, we want to make sure that we're using a 3-2-1 backup strategy, which basically says we want to have 3 copies of your data at 2 different locations or 2 different medias, and at least 1 offsite copy. So let's see how we can use Hybrid Sync 3 to accomplish this with minimal to no cost. So your best protection against virus and ransomware is to use actual backups, preferably offline backups so they can't be corrupted. To start with, let's set up several different backup options such as NAS to NAS, NAS to external, and NAS to cloud. We're going to use Hybrid Backup Sync 3 on the QNAP to create a variety of these jobs that we'll need to keep you protected. So let's go ahead and launch the program. So if we look at the program layout, we'll see these different tabs over here, starting with Overview, Backup and Restore, Sync, Jobs, Services, and Storage Spaces. And we'll talk a little bit about syncing later, but for now what I want to talk about is how you actually structure this and what order you structure it in. And we're actually going to start with Storage Spaces. So we're actually starting from the last tab. And the reason we're doing that is because when we create the backup jobs, we need a destination. Unless you're copying to a local drive or an external drive attached to your NAS, you're going to need to create a storage space. So I've already got a couple created, but I'll show you what it takes to create one, even though I'm going to actually use these 2 for the testing. So to create one, we're just going to hit Create. And here we can select from either any of the cloud services, or in this case, we'll do a remote NAS. We'll put an IP address in. Let's detect it to make sure it's connected, and it is. And we'll put in a password that matches the remote NAS. Okay, so now we've put in the password. Let's hit Create. Takes a couple of minutes to create it. Okay, so as you can see under my remote NAS units, it's created the second unit that I just created. Again, I'm not going to use this one, but that's the process of actually creating a storage space for a secondary remote NAS. Now, in terms of cloud services, I'm using Wasabi. I did a separate video on Wasabi, so if you want to check that out, I'll give you an idea of how to set that up as a storage space so you can protect your stuff on the cloud. I like Wasabi because the pricing is very straightforward. It's $5.99 a month for a terabyte, and they don't charge you for egress or anything like that. Check out the video if you're interested in if you're looking for a good cloud service. So once we've created our storage spaces, we're going to go over to the tab that says Backup and Restore, and we're going to create a new backup job. And I've created a couple test folders here so we don't transfer all day long. I've put only 10 files in each. So I'm going to pick those 2 folders, hit Next. And the first one we're going to create is to the remote NAS. So let's pick the remote NAS. Here's the 2 that we created. I'm going to use the one I already had set up. So I'm going to hit that. Select. It reads the folder contents, and I'm going to select Backup and Backup Test. So that's where I'm going to dump these 2 folders. That's where the backup location is going to be. So I'm going to click OK. So here we have 2 folders, and this is the location or the path location of where the remote NAS is going to. So I'm going to hit Next, and again I'm going to give it a different job name just so I can keep it straight. Next. So here I have a couple different options. First of all, I need a scheduler. You should always do your backup on a schedule. So I'm going to go ahead and say, let's do this one daily at 2 o'clock in the morning. Hit OK. And then one of the things I want to take a look at is version management. Now, I want to enable version management because there are times where the most current backup may be corrupt because the files got corrupt in between backups cycles. So you want to be able to go back to an earlier version. So I'm going to enable version management. I'm going to leave it at simple versioning. It retains out of the box 100 different versions. It's a bit excessive, but it'll definitely get the job done. You can increase or decrease that as you wish. I'm going to hit next. I don't need any filters. I do want to talk quickly about the dedupe program, QNAP's dedupe program. It's only available to NAS units that have either an Intel or an AMD processor. So if you don't see this option, it's because you may have one of the ARM units. But what it does basically is it looks for duplicate files that are exactly the same, and it doesn't back up both files. What it does, it creates metadata for each location, but only one copy of the file. And it's real handy for saving space, especially when you're transferring to a cloud system. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next and create. So there's my first backup job, which is a NAS to NAS. And now I want to do an external drive. So when I plug an external drive in, I'm prompted with this message. So I'm going to tell it to use this device for backup. And then what I'm going to do is create a new job, new backup job. This time I'm going to pick the same two folders, I mean. Click next. This time I'm going to pick local NAS. Hit select. And here, if I scroll down a little bit, I should see my external device. And so I'm going to click on the little arrow here because I created a folder on that called backup. So I'm going to go ahead and select that one, click OK. So you can see here I'm going to go ahead and rename this. So I've given it a name just so I don't get confused. Same thing, I got two folders going to this external drive under the backup folder. So I'm going to hit next. Same options, let's give it a schedule. This one we'll do weekly, and we'll do Tuesdays and Saturdays at 3 o'clock. Click OK. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to enable versioning. Click next. I'm going to leave the dedupe program on, hit next, and create. So as you can see, I now have two jobs created. Neither one have been run. So let's go ahead and do that just so you can kind of see how it works. So I'm going to go ahead and let's back this one up now. Okay, that one's done. And let's back up the external drive as well. Okay, that one's done as well. So I've got my first two jobs created and I've run them. Let's do one last one. I'm going to do a new backup job. And this time I'm going to pick the same two folders again to back up. Hit next. This time I'm going to use my Wasabi account. So let's pick Wasabi. Use my native account. Hit select. I'm going to put it under this real-time storage bucket. And I could create a new bucket from here if I needed to. I'm going to hit select, put it in the backup folder I created under that bucket, click OK, and there we have it. This time I'll put Wasabi so that we understand where that's going. So I've got my two folders going to a bucket on Wasabi, the real-time storage bucket on Wasabi under a backup folder. Click next. Same thing, I'm going to run this one. I'm going to do this one weekly on Sundays at 2 o'clock in the morning. Click OK. I'm going to do a couple other things here. I'm not going to turn on version management. So let's go ahead and hit next. And there's one other thing I want to draw your attention to that we didn't talk about on the first two, but they are definitely available. And that's the options to use client-side encryption. So you always want to use client-side encryption if you don't know if the location you're going to isn't protected. So what this basically does is it encrypts the file before sending it, whether you're sending it to a remote NAS or whether you're sending it to an external drive or to a cloud service. So I would suggest taking a look at what your needs are there. If you're going to an external drive, I definitely recommend you do it. Remote NAS, I would do it as well, unless you're going to an encrypted folder and it stays within your LAN. And I would consider going to an external cloud service as well. But let's go ahead and use client-side encryption. I'm going to give it a password. So I gave it a password. I have to click that I understand, click OK. And so now I have enabled client-side encryption. So I'm going to hit next and create. Okay, so now I've created my third job called the Wasabi. It has not been run yet, so I'm going to go ahead and run that now. And again, this is the one with client-side encryption. So let's back it up now. Okay, so the cloud backup job is completed. So now I've completed all three. So let's just to do a kind of an overview. We've created three separate jobs going through three separate locations, three separate storage spaces. And I can create as many of these as I need to. So if I want to create a bunch more, I can certainly do that. And you want to kind of do this so that it makes sense to you. So you might want to break up your folders into multiple jobs, just so because they may run, you may want them to run at a different time. It's totally really up to you how you want to break things up and how you want to make the backup strategy work. My suggestion is that you keep it as simple as possible. Don't forget the client-side encryption. Definitely do multiple locations, whether it's a couple different cloud services or an external drive, or if you have a secondary NAS, definitely take a look at that as well. So before we get into the restore, I do want to cover one little thing. I want to just show you what happens when you back up, because I know there's been some confusion on what's the difference between a sync and a backup, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But on a backup job, it's a proprietary backup program. So when you look at the files, you'll see that it creates a file structure. This is under my backup test location that we just did the NAS to NAS to. If I look under there, I'm going to see a database and some metadata. And if I look under the dedupe folder in the vault, I can see my first backup job, and it's got a bunch of cryptic extensions and file names are completely gone. So the bottom line is you can't access these files directly. So if you tried, you're not going to get there from here. You don't want to mess with this folder. This folder should, any of these folders here, this entire folder structure for the backup should be left alone. It has to be accessed from the restore program, and it's basically being used by the backup program. So I wanted to just cover that, so in case you think you can just go drag stuff open, it doesn't work that way. That's where sync comes in. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So now that we've completed the backup, let's do a restore. And to do the restore, we're going to go into the backup test folder that we've been using for the backup. I'm going to cream all the files out. So I'm going to delete these 10 files. And our job right now is to run the restore and put those files back. Let's use the external NAS to NAS backup job, and we're going to do a restore from that. So let's hit a restore job, and we're going to back up from the remote NAS. We'll pick the one that I actually am using. Click select. So here it's going to ask me to select the backup job, and here under source it's going to say I'm going to pick this one, which is the only one I have there. If you had multiple versions or multiple days, it would all show up here, so you could selectively pick which backup job you want. So since I only have one right now, I'm going to pick that one, and I'm going to pick the folder I just deleted. Click OK. And under location, I'm going to pick original location. I don't want to put them somewhere else. I want to put them back because I just creamed them out. So I could, if I wanted to, put them at a different location. But for now, I'm just going to leave them at the original. I'm going to hit next. No scheduler, no anything. All I want to do is run restore now. Click next, and restore. Okay, so the restore program is completed. It takes a little while to run the restore. It's kind of slow. But let's take a look at that folder now. And if we take a look at the folder, we'll see that all 10 files have been restored. So that's about it for the restore and the backup configuration. So before we wrap up here, let's talk a little bit about the differences between sync and backup. Because at first, when you take a look at it, it's a little bit confusing as to what the differences are. So we just quickly went through the backup, and we saw the proprietary file format. We saw that we need a backup program and a restore program to actually access the files. That, in essence, is the key difference. In a sync program, the files are copied in their native format. So there's no compression, there's no database, there's no anything. It basically just copies the file from one location to the other. So we're going to get into a quick example of that, but first I want to kind of cover all of it. When you set up a sync, you can use any of the storage spaces that you set up. So if you're using any cloud services or external drives or whatever it is that you're using, you can basically, they can share. So you can have one folder, for example, for syncing while the other is used for backup. Let's go through a quick sync job so you can kind of get this to see how it works. So if I go over to sync, I've got one created already, but let's go ahead and create another one so we can kind of see how it works. I'm going to create a one-way sync, meaning I'm taking the files from my NAS to a secondary destination. In this case, we'll do a remote NAS, and I'm only going one way. So it's not going to do a two-way sync because I don't want that. I want to just copy the file from my NAS to an external location. So should I lose access to that NAS, or the files get wiped out, or just a couple files get wiped out, I can go right in there and drag them back. So I don't have to go through a lengthy procedure. I can actually just go to that remote NAS, log in, copy them back, and it's a done deal. So I'm going to go ahead and do one-way sync. I'm going to do a remote NAS. We'll pick the same one we've been using. And let's pick a folder. So I'll pick the same folder I've been using. Click OK. So let's go to the remote location. And I'm going to pick backup. Make a new folder, call it sync. So I made a new folder called sync. I'll use that. Click OK. And I can keep adding pairs. So basically I can go ahead and add another pair and keep on building this particular sync set as much as I want to. I'll show you how I've set mine up. I prefer to break things down a little differently and run everything on a separate sync job, but you have the choice to do what you want. So I'm going to click next. Same options as we had before, sort of. So I'm going to I could pick real-time synchronization, or I can run a scheduler. But in this case, I'm just going to run no schedule, and I'm going to say sync now because I want it to sync now. Hit next. I'm not going to use any filters. Not going to use any particular policies here, except I'm not going to take a snapshot, which I have mine disabled anyway, but if you don't, you might want to consider tearing that off. I'm going to hit next, and I'm going to hit create. So it's going to run, basically copy all those files over, and then I'll quickly log into that NAS and show you what the files look like. So if I take a look at the folders, if I take a look at the sync folder that I just created, you can see all 10 files have been dropped over, and I can access these the same way that I would access any other file. So basically what I've done is literally copy the files over from one location to the other, except now that I'm doing it automatically. And that's the key difference between a backup and a sync, is that the sync copies files natively, the backup puts it in its own proprietary format, runs a dedupe, can run many other features including client-side encryption, all that stuff that you get on a backup program that you don't get on the sync program. So that's really the key difference. It's important to understand those because you want to use those as you need them. In my case, I only use the sync to either an encrypted Wasabi folder or to another NAS unit on my particular LAN. And if I'm doing a sync on encrypted data in terms of an encrypted volume, I make sure that I'm syncing to an encrypted volume. So let's take a quick look at some of the ones that I've got so you get a better idea. And again, these are tools that you can mix and match and do what you want to do. My suggestion is that you set up both. So you should have a sync folder for all the stuff that you use on, fairly regularly, and also do a backup for an actual backup. If we take a look at some of the jobs that I've created on my NAS, you'll see that I have a mixture of both NAS to NAS and NAS to Wasabi sync jobs. And most of these are sync jobs. So this allows me to actually control the copying of data and always have two sets of data handy locally that I can get to. So I hope that makes sense. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you haven't already done so, please subscribe and click that notifications icon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.